So yeah, this is big. Iran attacked Israel. Why did it do so now? And what's going to be the reaction from Tel Aviv? Let's find out. Hello everybody, my name is Stavros. I'm a professor of international relations and a democracy advocate. You're here with me on Black Flag Media. This is a free and independent channel promoting peace, justice, and truly democracy at its purest forms. We will talk more about that in later videos. So let's talk a little bit about what happened in Israel, the latest attack by Iran, which was pretty unprecedented. I would have to say that this is the biggest attack that Iran has ever launched against Israel and the existence of these two states. And according to the US Pentagon, it seems that this was an even worse attack than the attack launched by Iran back in April. This was twice in weight, the bombs, and twice the amount of explosives that were carried by Iranian ballistic missiles against Israel. This was called, according to Iranian sources, Operation True Promise Number 2. The first one was back in April. The first attack was the Iranians said that it was a response against Israeli bombardment of the Iranian consulate inside Syria in Damascus, and then this attack apparently is a response against Israeli targeted assassinations. Both in Lebanon, the Israelis recently assassinated Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and also the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, the Palestinian movement, inside Tehran, which was an affront to the Iranian Islamic Republic. So they're responding against that. They're launching this True Promise Number 2, the second attack. This is a more serious attack. The previous one was some ballistic missiles, but also some cheap drones that were easily thrown out of the sky by the Israelis and their allies. This time around, we only saw ballistic missiles, and also the Iranians launched the Fateh number 1 ballistic missile. This is an intercontinental ballistic missile, which can it's a supersonic missile, hypersonic, I would say, missile, and this is why it seems that the Iron Dome defenses, the 3 layers of the Israeli air defense system, could not stop these missiles. Again, these are missiles that can carry also nuclear warheads. Let's hope that we don't get to that point. So according to the Iranian resources, they targeted 3 bases, only military installations. They're saying that the Israelis are targeting civilian population, civilian infrastructure. We're not doing that. We're only targeting bases, military bases. They targeted the Nevatim, the Hadzerim, and the Tel Nof air base. These are bases housing the F-35 fighter jets, specifically the Nevatim one, and also the Hadzerim base houses the F-15 fighter jets, and these were the jets that the Israelis used to assassinate Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Lebanon. So this was a targeted revenge against the weapons of destruction by the Israelis against the axis of resistance, as the Iranians called it. According to the Iranian side, they say that more than 80%, almost 90% of our missiles hit their targets. So we had a tremendous success rate of this attack. That's what the Iranians are saying. On the other side, we're hearing reports from the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, saying this was a total failure. They missed, basically, the Iranians missed. But recently, we have some reports from the media, from Israeli media, saying that yes, indeed, there was some Air Force bases targeted, and truly there were some damage, but no casualties, no extensive damage. So this is where we're seeing a different approaches to what actually happened here, to different narratives. And it's funny because if you think about it, according to the Israeli side, they thwarted this attack and the Iranians missed. So this means that they shouldn't be attacking them as a retaliation strike against them in a fierce manner. I would argue that they don't have to attack. These countries attack because they want to maintain their deterrence levels in the ladder of escalation. If you think about it, it was the Iranian response to an Israeli airstrike inside Tehran, assassinating Ismail Haniyeh, which led to this attack. So if you think about it, again, the Israelis don't need to respond. This was their response to their initial actions. So if they do respond, again, one might argue that they don't have to respond in a fierce manner. Remember back in April, the Israelis had the last say. It seems that they always want to have the last say, the last word, and they did so, but they they had a small targeted area in Isfahan, Iran. A small military installation was targeted. It was extremely limited, and everybody dropped it after that. Iran didn't respond back, so that was for the best of humanity, I would say. So let's hope that something like that, we can see something like that. We don't see any disproportionate event by Israel. But the problem is that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, he wants this war. He craves for this war. So Netanyahu is creating the conditions. He's setting the stage for this war to actually take place between his country and Iran, and it's rather unfortunate. So let's examine why this was the time that the Iranians decided to launch this attack against the Israelis, and they have been, challenging them and threatening them with this attack for many weeks now. Why now? So 3 reasons that we can actually, describe here. The first one is the military incursion or operation, however you want to call it, of Israel against Hezbollah inside Lebanon. And Hezbollah has been really facing some troubles and some difficult times right now, with mostly all of their leadership being assassinated by Israel. So they have been dealt huge blows by the Israelis. Now they're facing an outright invasion inside their land. And, the Iranians wanted to support Hezbollah, basically, boost the morale of the people that are fighting the Israelis. We're having ground troops of Israel fighting against Hezbollah troops inside southern Lebanon. So Iran wanted to support them, but also they wanted to support their own public image to their allies, showing this, projecting this image of protecting them and being there in this time of need. They don't want to see Hezbollah, that front, to be dismantled, or Hezbollah to fail. Obviously, the Iranians don't want to see that to happen, and they wanted to pull some resources from some Israeli resources from the front to this defense. This is the most important reason. The second reason is that this is the best time that Iran could do so, because there was a gap in U.S. defenses. The U.S. participated in the defense of Israel against these incoming missiles. The U.S. is supporting Israel, but this couple of weeks they decided to. They had 2 aircraft carrier groups in the region. They still have the Lincoln, the Abraham Lincoln, and they also had the Roosevelt. They pulled the Roosevelt away, so they only had 1 aircraft carrier. But understanding that the situation is getting worse between Hezbollah and Israel, the U.S. decided to send another aircraft carrier. The Harriet Truman is on its way. It's going to be there in less than a week. So this was a perfect gap for Iran to strike right now, because obviously with this aircraft carrier we have many aircraft and many Marines, almost 40,000 troops the U.S. will have in the region. So this was the perfect timing, and also they want to strike before the U.S. elections. The Iranians are afraid of President Trump because of Trump. He's really warmongering against the Iranians. He didn't like the peace deal that Obama had struck with them. He pulled the U.S. out of that deal, and they're truly afraid of what a Trump presidency might mean, the Iranians, that is. So yes, this was a perfect time for them to attack. Interestingly, this attack was known to the U.S. It seems that the U.S. has the capability, the ISR, the so-called information, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities with their many bases in the region, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Saudi, in UAE. They were aware of this attack, but still they didn't have the time to mount the defenses of all the allies of Israel. Remember, back in the day, in April, many countries participated in the Israeli air defense, like the UK, like France, etc. There was no warning from Iran this time, but only the U.S. capability, to predict this attack and also help bring down some of these missiles. The problem for the Israelis was that it seems that there was a swarming effect in the Israeli air. Basically, the Iranians managed to overcome the AI, the artificial intelligence, which commands their air defense systems. The Iron Dome is only the lower level of the air defense system of Israel. We have the David Sling, and then the Arrow system above that. All of these systems were not able and capable to mount a defense and destroy all these incoming missiles. So they failed to stop all of them. Actually, they ran out of ammo. The Israelis ran out of ammo, and they had to use backup plans, such as the U.S. Patriot air defense system, which means that the Iron Dome, the whole Iron Dome system, including the Iron Dome, including the David Sling and the Arrow, failed to stop all these attacks. And we saw videos online, even though there's a media blackout from inside Israel. Nobody's allowed to post anything. We did see these missiles coming through and striking down specifically in not populated areas, meaning in bases. The amount of the damage, the extent is not known, but it seems that yes, the AI that was supposedly capable of handling all these missiles, the AI couldn't. The AI decided to let through some of the missiles that the AI thought that there were no, that it wasn't a big threat for these missiles to come through. But yes, these missiles did come through. And also, we don't know the percentage of interception, which usually the Israeli Defense Forces they're letting us know the percentage of interception. We don't know that. So yeah, it seems that the ballistic missiles are strong enough, fast enough to pierce through the Iron Dome, and this is what happened. So the response here, this is the last part of the equation. We need to know what's going to happen. Let's hope let's hope to avoid the worst. The worst would be a targeted Israeli attack against Iranian nuclear facilities. This would be destructive. Thankfully, the U.S. President Biden said he will not condone, he will not support such an attack. It doesn't mean that he is saying the same things to the Israelis, but at least publicly it will be a big blow for Israel's public image to strike on a nuclear facility. This is one option that they have. The other option is to strike military installations, specifically depots and airfields that these ballistic missiles launch from Iran. And also, the Iranians can target these military bases, air bases, and also they can target the people responsible in targeted assassinations, the people responsible from the Iranian military force and the Revolutionary Guards, to assassinate them, people that were involved in this attack. So this was also, this is also another option that they have. And I think the third option and the most possible one would be to hurt them where they attack them where they hurt, attack them where it's going to be the most painful for the Iranian regime, specifically the economy. How do you do that? You strike the oil industry. This will be, obviously a huge blow to Iran if they target, there's an island, the Kharg Island, which is right across Iran in the Gulf. And this is where 90% of its oil exports flow through. They can target this island. This will be immensely destructive, if you can imagine it, actually. And actually, the Iranians are threatening them, the Israelis, back and saying, if you dare attack our depots and our refineries, we're going to be attacking any U.S.-linked refinery in the region, meaning anything that has to do with Exxon or whatever. This is going to be a huge, major disaster for the maritime industry, for the oil industry. It's going to be a huge energy and financial crisis all over again. Let's hope that this doesn't happen. The Chinese are buying 40% of their oil from the Iranians. I think that the public global community will not accept Israel creating such a big mess by bombarding oil refineries, creating, especially we have the winter up ahead. Nobody is going to explain. It will be a crazy idea for the Israelis to go through with this plan. So let's hope we're seeing something limited in the scope of what we saw in April, but unfortunately, I fear for the worst. That's it for today, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe this video. Keep raising the black, guys, the black flag of resistance. Final thoughts here. The Houthis, the Ansarullah, also bombarded Israel in solidarity and support of what the Iranians have been doing. Yes, they said that they did manage to launch their own ballistic missiles inside Israel. And also we're seeing some reactions from Iraq. The Iraqi militias are saying that, yes, we're going to be fighting back as well. And also we're going to be targeting American bases inside Iraq. So it seems that it's pretty straightforward. Things are going to get really worse. There is an escalation coming. And unfortunately, the whole Middle East is going to be up in flames.